Now, when I got involved with Passive House, I will say that I almost stopped flying, which was really one of my big passions, because just flying around in a small Cessna and contributing emissions while you're trying to fight to reduce emissions is really an issue. No, I thought, well, I could be a part of the solution, and I created this Net Zero Wings. So I can urge everybody, think about a passion, a usage pattern, something that emits emissions, to maybe not just cut it out, but think about how you can be part of a solution and a way forward.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland, New Zealand.
And I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington.
How's it going, Zach?
It's good. It's good. It's cold, but it's good.
It's hot here. Yeah, we're. I got a notification on my screen yesterday saying it was approaching record for this time of year. So I don't know the average. Yeah, we're breaking records here.
Yeah. I saw that we're at one point that, or maybe we are, or there's an expectation that we'll hit 1.48 degrees Celsius warming.
Yeah.
Right, this year.
Yeah.
So
above whenever the threshold was. So that's scarily close to the 1.5.
Yeah. My understanding from the climate scientists that I follow is that the expectation is that this won't be a long-term, this is partly the El Nino going on, of course, plus global warming. There's no denying that, but that 1.5 threshold that we're all concerned about is something that is over multiple years. Yes, we're now. It looks like we're getting really close.
And I have had conversations with people, recent homeowners, just this week and another late last year. A little bit upset and also really wanting to know how to address their apartments or their homes, their new homes, from getting too hot. Because they're just
right.
I mean, our building code doesn't have any requirements for overheating. There's insulation requirements to ensure that they're warm in winter, but there's nothing. And I think most people here would not know that. Most consumers, general public, would not know that the building code is completely silent, basically, when it comes to summer overheating and the maximum temperatures, as opposed to the energy efficiency of keeping warm in winter.
Right. Yeah, we're all going through a paradigm shift here.
Yeah. Of course, it's harder to do modelling wise, but it can be done, and there are measures that can be taken, especially early on in design. A little bit of touching on that today, because we are talking again about warm climates and designing good homes and passive homes in warm climates. We're going to get into that with our feature interview. But before we do, let's thank our sponsors.
Indeed. Yeah. Big thank you to the fine organizations that make our work at Passive House Accelerator possible. So thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Glavel, Ingwe Architecture, Minitaire, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Thank you too to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Gradient, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, PH Air Seal, and Source 2050. And a big shout out to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
Awesome. All right. Well, Stefan and Ryan have been on the show before. They will be familiar to some of our audience. Just over a year ago, I met Stefan and Ryan when we were in Chicago, and I was very excited to hear about some work they were doing down further south in Texas, and looking at Passive House down there, and that was sort of just after or just leading into the announcement that the FierceCon was going to be in Texas in 2023. And so it was great to catch up with them both there again. They both presented. They were both pretty present around the place, and doing some really interesting stuff. So caught up with them at the conference, but also scheduled a time to sit down with them to spend a bit more time going into detail about Build Zero Consulting, which is a company that they've formed together. And as they explained, they've brought together slightly different skill sets from both of them to provide some really good service to the industry, and hopefully increasing the demand for that, and increasing the reach of Passive House. So this is my chat with Stefan Goebel and Ryan Abendroth. Well, welcome back to the Passive House podcast. Both of you. I'm here with Stephen Goebel and Ryan Abendroth. How are you guys? Let's start with you first, Stephen. How are things?
Things are great. Nice and warm down here in Houston, Texas.
Yeah. It was very good. Of course, we were all there with you recently. It's coming up a couple of months ago now. But it was, I have to say, you're, I think, partly responsible for me, certainly for me wanting to come to Houston. I remember catching up with you guys in Chicago, and we were talking about a project that you were working on, and just started some work that was going on in that warmer climate. And I got really intrigued about Passive House in warm climate. So that was one of the key reasons I was keen to catch up and kind of see where things had come to. So we'll get into that. Ryan, how about you? Where are you based?
I'm in St. Louis, Missouri. It is not quite as warm here. It's below freezing.
Right. What's that climate like for those like me, who's in Australia at the moment, who's not necessarily familiar with Missouri climate?
Yeah, we're in the middle of the United States, so we get a little bit of everything, all 4 seasons. Although I think some of the transition seasons, it seems to go from like really hot to pretty cold, and really cold to pretty hot pretty quickly. Yeah. So like today it's 31 Fahrenheit, so it's about 0 in the morning, and then mid 50s in the afternoon.
And are you in a passive house?
I am not. I'm in a pretty good house though.
Right. Oh, that's good. That's good. Well, let's stay with you, Ryan. We did cover off this a little while ago, but just give us a brief rundown of your background. What's your training, and how did you get into Passive House?
Yeah, so I've been working on passive houses since 2008. When I was a student at the University of Illinois, we did a Solar Decathlon project for the U.S. Department of Energy's Solar Decathlon. And it was a passive house. We met Katrine Klingenberg through that process, and learned about passive house, and designed and built a 600 square foot house, transported it from the University of Illinois, where I was studying, to Washington, D.C. to compete in the competition. And we got second place overall. The first place team was the team from Germany, who also had a passive house. And so I thought, okay, this is a pretty good idea. We have, 20 teams or 2 passive houses here, and they came in first and second in the competition. And ever since then, I've been working on passive house projects.
Because passive house wasn't a requirement for the competition, but the Solar Decathlon is about being very efficient, and you have 10 challenges to accomplish. Is that right?
Yeah, and one of them is being zero energy. And
Right.
so having these small 600 square foot houses, getting enough PV on the roof. Like, one of the ways to really capitalize on that is to conserve as much energy as you can, so that your PV array can produce. And what was interesting in that year is overproduction counted towards the score. So there were like 50 bonus points. And the team that overproduced the most got all 50.
Right.
And then it was a percent basis after that. So that's actually how the German team won, is they were first in production, and we were second. And that's kind of how it worked out.
Which potentially has implications for embodied carbon, but that's probably a whole other topic.
Yeah. I mean, really, they had building integrated PV on their facade as well as on the roof. So they had a lot.
Right. And how did you go getting a building of that size airtight? Because that can be a challenge as well with really small buildings.
Yeah, I mean, it was really tough, and we did some things probably to make the numbers work that we wouldn't advise now, especially with climate specific building standards, which I'm sure we'll talk about, which weren't around back then.
Right.
As passive house goes.
Yeah.
We had to use some things like spray foam and very large fixed high gain windows, and really. Just really play with the model to get it to work.
Yeah. And Stefan, you got a background in doing a little bit of LEED and some building science. Where did you first come across Passive House?
Right. Well, I'm from Germany, as you may have picked up by now, and Passive House is widely adopted in Germany. And I think it was around 2010 that my dad actually built a house, and I was helping him a lot. So I got involved in this, and I got used to some of the Passive principles. I moved to the US in 2015, and then noticed that there was a lot of focus on Passive House. And so this is when I got really interested in it and took the course in Boston. And Ryan was actually my CPHC trainer.
Nice. And haven't looked back since. It is slightly ironic that you came to America to learn Passive House, but there you go. Now tell us about Build Zero, because you guys have you've obviously met doing training. You know each other as do lots of the people in the industry in the US. But what's the origin story of Build Zero Consulting?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. So we were actually working on quite a few projects before founding Build Zero together. A couple of houses in Texas where Stefan was local and I was doing the modeling. We had a larger client as well that we're still working with that we're already starting to do and realized we have 4 or 5 projects, and they kept coming in where it made sense to work together. And so, earlier this year, in the early spring, we decided to sort of make it official and join forces, really so that we can do, better and bigger passive house projects. I mean, we have this mission of, doing projects all over the U.S. and North America. We have a project in the Cayman Islands now, which is a whole sort of interesting climate to talk about as we talk about hot and humid climates. But really just our goal is to be able to scale up passive house. And I think we can do that better working together.
Stefan, what was the impetus of a passive house project in Houston? How did that get started?
I think we were contacted probably about 2 years back, a year and a half back. And this is both projects are actually sort of a first project for more to come. One is a developer who's interested, he's building his own house and wants to incorporate the passive principles and get the house certified to incorporate that in his firm. And the other project is called Positive Impact Homes, that focuses on veterans and kids with special needs. And so there's certain design aspects that the Passive House principal bring to the table that they want to adopt and then scale this to different level. So it was very appealing to us to be involved in this.
Is that so? In both instances, has that come from the client? Is it the client who's found out about Passive House and then reached out to you guys, as opposed to you trying to convince them that it's a good idea?
Right. That was really the client reaching out to us. Yeah. And that was before we really started actively trying to go out and educate the market and giving presentations. So that was client driven.
Right. And so is that what you do now? You try and present to potential clients and talk about Passive House?
Yeah, we're very fortunate. We are actually one of the Phius 101 presenters. And I think to this date, we've probably given the presentation to 600 professionals. And
Wow.
it's a blessing because there's a lot of excited and passionate professionals, architects out there that are very interested in this concept.
Yeah. Who typically turns up to one of those? Is it someone who with no knowledge, or maybe they've heard about Passive House, or are they coming from like a sustainability mindset? How do they get to even that stage?
I think they would have heard about it. They would have heard about it, have a general interest. We've been reaching out to a lot of firms across the entire US and offering the Phius 101. It's an AA accredited presentation, but I think there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of attention knowing that there's local codes that are changing and that they really need to know about what Passive House is.
Yeah. Now, so Ryan, you were doing the modelling initially, and how do you guys work together? Do you have a similar set of skills, or do one of you do part of a project and the other specialise in another part?
Yeah, generally we have some different skills. I'm more on the operation side, modeling, hydrothermal analysis, a lot of the detailed building science. Stefan has some skills in really like both sales and marketing, but in a technical way to architects. He has a background also in glazing and fenestration. So
yeah,
he does a lot of those sort of in-depth analysis on windows, doors, things like that.
Let's talk a little bit about hydrothermal modelling, particularly in those warmer climates. What are the big challenges there, and how is that whole area of building science developing in your mind? So particularly for the sort of southern states where you are, where it's sort of warmer where Stefan is warmer and more humid.
Yeah, so, it's kind of interesting because we've done a lot more hydrothermal modeling still in the colder climates.
Okay.
And it's interesting that even though those climates are more humid, that they actually generally have less hydrothermal issues because the temperatures are warmer, you have less condensation risk, and the walls are generally thinner as well.
Right.
So I think it's fairly straightforward. We also are getting a lot of, scenarios, or we haven't talked about this, but, the smaller wall systems, we might need maybe just a 2x6 or 2x6 with like 1 inch of continuous exterior insulation. And a lot of Texas gets you to sort of those Passive House numbers. And therefore you don't really need a hydrothermal as long as you're following kind of best, practice in terms of building science.
Yeah, and I mean that was the case for Ryan's house in that we went to the tour in he's built that first duplex Passive House, and he's got quite simple walls in that house, and the insulations, and I don't know if it's much more than code for that area.
And that's what we're finding is you don't need much beyond code.
Right.
there is I'll say admin that in terms of opaque insulation, when we get into the glazing requirements for code, it still needs to be quite a bit better. The air tightness requirements have to be quite a bit better. But assuming you have decent windows and doors and really good air tightness, yeah, the opaque assemblies look similar to what the code requires.
Right. One of the issues that we're coming up against now, not necessarily in full passive house, but in people sort of approaching more energy efficient buildings in our climate, which is quite humid, is still having the risk of condensation on any joints, particularly windows joining to the walls, and also floor to wall junctions. Does that often present as a risk in some of those humid climates? More from a thermal bridging point of view rather than a hygrothermal point of view.
Yeah, I think a little bit, but still maybe not to the same extent that we're concerned about it in a lot of these colder climates.
Right.
A lot of what we see in not quite passive house buildings where there might be issues is due to air leakage at those junctions,
right?
Rather than the thermal bridging.
Yeah. Stefan, how do we sell passive house in warm climates where it's much more forgiving, and you can make an argument for not needing to go to the full extent of a German standard? How do we go about?
It has great potential in a hot and humid climate, and being in Texas, being in Houston and Austin, knowing that, looking at the looking at the comfort that we have in this climate, we can looking at a psychrometric chart, we can open the windows about 10% of the time of the year. So our windows and doors are mostly shut because it's so humid and hot outside. So the idea of passive house, I think, works really well. Another aspect is air quality. Being in Houston, knowing there's about 150 refineries around us, knowing that we filter the air that's coming in and that we enhance the inner air quality, I think is a big one. How do we sell it? I think the inner air quality, bringing awareness to people on what that means, how that's measured, and how that's improved in a passive house. I think that would be a big topic to get into.
That I want to go back to that 10% because I think that raises an important point. I guess there's a perception that if you live in a warm climate that you can just have things open all the time. That's certainly how I tended to grow up here in Australia. But you're saying that 10%, is that the time when you really just have the ideal conditions of not too warm, not too cold, and not too humid?
Exactly.
So the perception is that it's easy to just have things open all the time. But if you actually look at the ideal conditions, that true, I call it the Goldilocks hours when things are just right, is actually a pretty small fraction of the total time.
Yeah, and that is true. So 10% of the time, those times in the end of October, beginning of November, maybe the times that we get the perfect conditions where it's not too hot, not too cold, and not too humid. So the idea of sealing the building and closing up is actually, I think, works really well here. Knowing that we can get away with double pane windows is another big topic in the South. So we can source locally. There's a lot of manufacturers in Texas for casement and tilt turn windows. We don't have to go overseas. They're cost effective. There's a lot of arguments for passive buildings in a hot and humid climate.
Yeah. Do people believe you when they say that you can only ideal conditions are only that short? Because do they come back with, oh, well, I've always lived like that. We just open the windows and we don't want to be sealed up in an airtight building. Is that a typical response?
No, I think people believe me more so than in colder climates down here, because it's so uncomfortable opening the windows in Texas, and we really don't do it very often. Dealing with mosquitoes on top of the temperature, it's not typically something that's opposed.
Yeah. Yeah,
the argument.
That's another good point. Ryan, where do you see things going from here? You mentioned some pretty exciting projects by the sound of it, including the Cayman Islands. I hope you get a field trip for that one.
Yes.
Where do you see things going for Build Zero, your company, but also Passive House in general, and particularly in those warmer climates?
I think we're going to see a lot of growth in general in Passive House in warmer climates. As Passive House is just getting more popular. They're seeing what's being done in places where there are a lot of passive houses coming online, where there's a lot of incentive programs in Massachusetts and New York and Colorado, Pennsylvania. That's sort of filtering and becoming like more mainstream, or just having more projects, and more people in the South are just hearing about this thing and wondering if it applies. And I think it's going to grow tremendously. I mean, the percent growth is going to be huge because there's only a handful of projects in most of these locations. And it usually takes the first project in a given city to kind of kickstart the next wave. So I do think we're going to see lots of growth overall.
Yeah. You mentioned those few projects. Any other exciting projects that you guys are working on at the moment that you can tell us about?
Yeah, so we're doing a couple interior retrofits in New York, a few small multifamily buildings, interior masonry retrofits, and a single-family townhouse infill project. Again, a few of these, we're doing a Marshall Fire rebuild project in Colorado, along with actually, I guess, 2 or 3 now in that area around Boulder. And then, single family homes in Kansas City and in Pennsylvania. We have this one in the Cayman Islands, which is just really interesting because we thought Houston and Austin were hot. But it turns out the Cayman Islands is actually hot.
Yeah.
And so, it needs a significant amount of cooling and even insulating the slab because the ground looks hot. That's kind of the first takeaway, is the ground's actually hot enough that it's heating the building. Which is a different thing than we generally have seen, even in the very southern U.S.
I think one project to mention that we're very excited about too is sort of a little bit out of the wheelhouse. But if you're a passive house consultant, you are called on projects that are a little bit out of the ordinary. So this one deals with a vertical takeoff and landing manufacturer that's developing eVTOLs. And as we know, transportation contributes about 22% of the emissions worldwide. And so as buildings have the 42%, transportation 22, makes it 64. And this project really touches on transportation. So we're very excited to be part of it to enable the Vertiport, like an airport, but for smaller vertical and takeoff landing planes, to become an electric infrastructure to help charge planes.
So you're talking about like big oversized drones, not SpaceX rockets.
4-seaters. So there's a pilot and 4 passengers, smaller airplanes that are collaborating with United and other bigger airlines for transportation needs.
Did I remember you saying that you're a pilot as well, Stefan?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
There was an early interest of yours to be flying around?
Yes, I've been a pilot since when I was in Germany. I got my pilot license. I was flying in the US as well. Now, when I got involved with Passive House, I will say that I almost stopped flying, which was really one of my big passions, because just flying around in a small Cessna and contributing emissions while you're trying to fight to reduce emissions is really an issue. No, I thought, well, I could be a part of the solution, and I created this Net Zero Wings, just side hustle, which is a website that brings people together that are thinking about alternative propulsion, advocating for net zero carbon travel, And I think maybe one of the reasons I like to tell myself that we got involved with this project, more so Ryan's expertise, I feel, but so it actually helped, I think, in a sense, to get involved with this project and understand what this company is about, that really wants to change travel and reduce emissions. So I can urge everybody to think about a passion, a usage pattern, something that emits emissions, to maybe not just cut it out, but think about how you can be part of a solution and a way forward.
Yeah. That's very cool. We'll put a link to that. People can check out Net Zero Wings. It's very exciting and a very nice coming together of those interests to be able to work on it as one of your projects as well. So next year, hopefully we'll see you guys in Philadelphia. Are either of you still involved in LEED or green building, sort of more broadly than just Passive House?
I think we're both LEED professionals, or have been at one point, but really our focus is on Passive House.
Yeah. You're planning to be at in Philadelphia next year?
Yeah, I think so. It's going to be fun.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, I think that's pretty significant, and I'm really excited to see those two worlds come together like that to look at the broader scope of sustainability, resilience, and all the things like LEED do around waste and carbon, and incorporating that with Passive House. I think it's going to be super exciting. Awesome. Hey, well, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it, both of you. Is there anything you want to close off with? Anything we've missed out? I guess we should do a bit of a plug for where people can find out more from or where to get in touch if they're interested in a project.
What I want to add is that we're offering the Phius 101. There's an advanced, more technical AAA presentation coming out in January. We're going to offer essentially once a month an office hour. So anybody that's interested in passive buildings, please just reach out. We're just trying to educate.
Awesome. And so people can find that at buildzeroconsulting.com. We'll put a link to that as well. And they can find your contact details there. Thank you very much, both of you. Really appreciate it.
And that was Stefan Goebel and Ryan Abendroth from Build Zero Consulting. What do you think, Zach?
Well, great interview. And I am again reminded about how important the Solar Decathlon program has been for this movement.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many movers and shakers in our world of Passive House that were first kind of introduced to this whole notion through the Solar Decathlon program. So it was fun to hear Ryan's perspectives and the congratulations to that team back in the day for getting second place.
It's surprising, but yet not surprising how Passive House always end up being a solution to the challenges that the Solar Decathlon puts down.
Right. No. And so, Ryan and his team got beat by the Germans and then Ryan had the chance to train Stefan when he came from Germany to the US.
Yeah.
So that was fun.
Yeah. I like the connection with flying and Stefan's passion for flying and the science of aeronautics, but also one thing we didn't really get into, but I've reflected on is the very procedural nature of flying, and everything's a process and a tried and tested process, and I think there's some good parallels there with good building performance, that you have checklists and you just do things very methodically, and if you run into a problem, then you sort of you're trained to pull out the relevant checklist for that, and that attention to detail, but also following a process, I think has a lot of potential to improve the efficiency and the scale of any type of building, but especially high performance building, where the goal is to reduce the errors or to to foresee any problems that might occur and be prepared for that, and just have and address it in a calm but effective way. And then, of course, the coming back to finding a low carbon solution to not just a problem, but also an interest and a passion. And Stefan's really wanting to get it back into flying. And now the whole world of electrification offers a way to do that without the guilt.
Right. Yeah. No, I appreciated that urging that he offered of like, don't necessarily simply give up the emissions producing passion that you have, but maybe lean in a little bit and figure out how to use your interest in that area to decarbonize that space. Well, and we have a little video. There's like a 60-second video that explains what a vertiport is that we can include in show notes. Yeah. So that people can kind of visualize what he's talking about. But it kind of looks like something from that city and that planet in Star Wars, with all the flying vehicles.
Yeah. The other thing I really like about these two is they just get along so well. I kind of forget when I'm talking to them that they're in different parts of the country. But they're working very well together, and part of the reason for that is that they have very complementary skill sets and personalities, and I think that's really helpful for the industry where you've got that the sort of the technical side, but also the getting out, talking to people. They're doing a bit of training as well, which is always good to stay involved and stay on top of your game. So I look forward to seeing where their little company grows to, particularly in that challenging, still early days in Texas and in those warmer climates, but we're seeing more and more interest and much more demand. And I think there is going to be an increasing demand for homes and buildings that perform throughout the year, including summertime. And Passive House does have some solutions, and Phius particularly, I think, is looking at some really good ways of looking at all-round comfort and resilience.
Well, and as kind of the geographic reach of Passive House increases, and they're specifically looking, they're practicing in the Phius rubric of Passive House. As that the application of Phius principles expands into these hotter areas like the Cayman Islands, where suddenly they're thinking about hot ground, like insulating, the slab to deal with the fact that the ground is hot. I think that there are also then lessons that can be applied to, kind of the as the climate is changing, the future of buildings in places where we really haven't, so it's all part of that paradigm shift, I think, that we're going through, that we alluded to in the intro. So it's cool to like this important kind of pioneering work a little bit, that's happening. And I know there's a kind of also a important kind of feedback loop that happens with the certification as well, that then comes back and informs what Phius is doing and how they're, the kind of refinements that they can make to the certification. So, and really cool to hear 600, that they've reached 600 people, 600 practitioners with their Phius 101 training.
Yeah, that's great.
Super cool.
Yeah, I think that level of intro training is really, really important, because it's all well and good, teaching the converted how to do a certification, but increasing the awareness in the general population, or even just the trades and the builders and all the peripheral people that are very necessary to achieving what we want to achieve. That's where there's a lot of need. I think having those sort of introductory courses is really, really helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. All right. We've got a few things coming up, but one big thing coming up you want to talk about?
Yeah, definitely. So the big thing coming up is Reimagine Buildings 24, which was going to be March 7th and 8th. And for folks who haven't already heard about it, this is this big around the world 24 hours event that we're producing. It was the biggest thing I think we've ever done at Passive House Accelerator, and so kind of it's all hands on deck. But it's really exciting. Last week we shared some of the updates on the programming that we're going to be sharing on it. But essentially, it's meant to celebrate and highlight this global movement that's going on to transform buildings so that they can both slow climate change and make us more resilient to it. So there's a real grounding in Passive House, but it's understanding that building decarbonization is about really great energy efficiency, as well as using low embodied carbon or carbon sequestering materials, electrifying everything in our buildings, and getting that electricity from clean energy. So there are all sorts of leaders in the worlds of energy efficiency, embodied carbon, electrification, and how to integrate buildings with the grid, who will be presenting. We have continuing education credits via AIA that we'll be offering for live attendance. And I think one thing to highlight too is that there will be some of us who will be up for 24 hours taking in everything live, but that's not required. So it basically, you can register for the conference and then take in the portions of the programming that are convenient to you in your time zone. And we've been really careful to curate programming that we think will be interesting to you, and that includes both notable local work as well as global work. But so you can take in that live, and that's where you can earn AIA credits. But then for whatever you miss, you can come back and access it asynchronously via recordings on the conference site. So we hope folks will join us. We're super excited about this. It's a pretty unique event, and it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's great to get those points attributed to that. There is going to be some really valuable content. So, I'm sure people will get lots out of it, but it's always nice to have that as an additional bonus for time spent. Don't forget to check out the Reimagine YouTube channel as well. There's lots of really great videos over there, and of course see the promo video there as we've shown as well. All right, anything else we need to plug, Zach?
Well, we're back at it with our live programming as well. So this coming week we have Ed Edinger of Edinger Engineering Associates, based in New York State. He's going to be presenting at Construction Tech, implementing cutting edge and circular MEP strategies within passive mixed use affordable housing. So join us for that on January 24th, noon Eastern.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much. And we'll be back again next week on Passive House Podcast.